So, let me see. For some reason or another, I can't see.
Okay, we
I
are
must,
live.
yeah, but I can't see the chat room. You know how it comes down? So, usually that pops up. They've changed it all. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me muttering and complaining? No, I'm not really complaining. I'm just saying it's not like it always is. It's not the same as it used to be because I usually, perhaps it's because I've got this thing on full screen. I don't know. I'm not sure. But anyway, good morning, good morning, good morning. I have no idea of the date. I'd forgotten yesterday that it was Saturday tomorrow. The days just seem to be running into each other. They're going so fast. I know that it's November, and I know I know that what is it, Chris? It must be the 16th or 17th.
13th. We just passed 11/11, remember?
Oh good. So it's I'm not as far into it as I thought I was. So
Yeah.
today is 13th of November. Right. So let me see where we are now. First of all, I would like to say good morning to Gregel, who, as always, is standing to my right side. And I'd like to say good morning, Chris. Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rosemary.
I know you've got visitors this weekend, haven't you? I know that you're very busy, so I want to say thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule with your family, visitors, whoever they are, whatever you call guests, whatever, to do this with us this morning. Um, so, um, so, are you having a good time with them? Is it nice having them around you?
Oh, it's so nice just to be with people. It's just been a long 5.5 months really without anyone.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's a, I think so many of us who live by ourselves. I'm lucky because I do a lot of stuff on FaceTime and Zoom and stuff like that. So it's almost as if I do have a lot of company. Unfortunately, though, it's so much more these days virtual, as they say. However, have I'm so lucky because I don't actually I've been on my own for so long. I don't actually mind being on my own, and I've got lots of things that I do. You all know that I love to cook. I love to knit, although I can't remember the last time I picked up knitting needles. Which shame on me because it doesn't look as if I'm going to be able to knit my grandson his Christmas sweater this year. Maybe I'd better get on with that. Take a look at that. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Anyway, so it's difficult for people who aren't used to being on their own. And Chris, you know, you're on your own for because of Mike. Because I don't want to say lost Mike, especially not when he's standing looking at me as he is right now. We didn't lose him. He is here with us this morning. And because, as you told everyone, he was a soldier, an Air Force man. Do they call Air Force men soldiers? We're all, he was a military man, let me put it that way. So he's sharing this month with us with glee. So he just is blowing you kisses just to let you know that he's in amongst all of you, which I know you know. I'm rambling on again. Do we have anybody with us this morning, Chris?
We do, and they're still logging on. So we have a bunch of people in our chat room. It's great to see
Okay.
all some familiar names.
Well, I don't want to start the story until we've given people a chance to sort of, get going with logging on. But do you want to tell us a little bit about Mike and his military career, Chris, while we're waiting for people?
Oh, goodness. When he was in high school, he was oh, what the heck? Now you get me on the spot here. Anyways, there's a program in high school that sort of preps kids to see if they would like to be in the military, and he was in that group.
Oh,
And
yeah.
his dad had groomed all of his kids to potentially go into the service. One went to the Air Force Academy, which was Mike, and his brother went to the Army. What the? what the heck, the academy in West Point. Thank you, West Point. And another sister was enlisted and then went to serve.
Oh, I didn't realize how much your family was an army family. Your Mike's
Yeah,
family was an army family.
his dad was as well. Eric, yes, ROTC was the group. Um, so that's where he started. He went to the Air Force Academy. He flew fighter jets. Um, and then he worked as an air liaison officer with the Army as an Air Force person. So he had, and then he served in the Vermont National Guard and the Vermont Air Guard. So he's done quite a bit.
Right, right. No wonder he's joining us then this month. He's just, and of course, we did have our wonderful um, evening last Thursday. Was it Thursday?
Yeah,
Um, we we had some lovely stories. Wasn't that? I'm trying to think of his name.
Jim, wasn't it?
Jim. Wasn't Jim's story stunning, inspiring, amazing? I'm not sure. Did you manage to get it up on face on Facebook?
Well, it is up on your YouTube channel for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, he was definitely inspiring, and to think he's one person representing so many men
Yes.
and women who have fought in wars and terrible situations.
Yeah. I mean, when he started to describe the bullets hitting the ground all around them, and then of course he was wounded. Two of his comrades died there, and another wonderful guy came and actually rescued him. He was rescuing, he and his another soldier were rescuing somebody. Unfortunately, then the person they were trying to rescue died, got shot again, as did the other guy, as did Jim, but Jim survived and was dragged to safety by this a very brave um, guy, a medic who helped him to get him back to his men and get him back to safety. I mean, you listen to war stories, and that's what this month is about, or partly about anyway. And certainly Thursday, November 11th, is Remembrance Day. We call it Remembrance Day. Um, Tomorrow is in Britain Remembrance Sunday. Well, they'll be having lots of services. We'll all be wearing poppies. And I know that I think here in the States, don't you call that day uh, Veterans Day? Is that right?
Well, this past Thursday was our Veterans Day.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I don't know though. Maybe you do something special on the with the churches on Sunday, on the Sunday service. We always try to do that in England, I think. But it's not just remembering our heroes. And let me point out that our heroes, they're not necessarily wearing a uniform. We have heroes who, even as we're speaking, we have those heroes who are staying at home, taking care of their children while their spouses go off to war, or while their spouses go off to work to be the breadwinners. Heroes come in different shapes and sizes, and for many different reasons. Um, but we also, I'm certainly curious because my father was definitely, I mean, he was a lifetime soldier. He was a professional soldier all of his life. Stayed in the army. He went in when he was 13 years old, lied about his age. You had to be 14 and a half to be allowed into the army. And by the time they found out that he was too young, he was old enough, and they let him stay in. So that's a pretty neat story. Um, my father, I think, joined the army because there wasn't much in, when my father was a boy, there wasn't much in the way of work. I suppose you could go into the factories or the coal mines, and obviously he didn't care for that. But he also, I think, joined for the adventure of it. And he had brothers, he had many brothers and sisters, but his brothers, I think many of his brothers were in the army, so he just he did that, and he loved, I have to tell you, I believe that he loved every single second of it. He was 55 years old when he was forced to retire, and I was somewhere around 11 or 12 years old at that point when he was forced to retire, and we were forced to have him at home with us, which we'd never had before because he was always off traveling or doing something or another in the army, and we didn't see him very often. Actually, growing up as children, he was really not in our lives as such. He was just that man who came, you know, we knew he was our dad, of course, but he was just that man who came for maybe a weekend. He'd come on a Friday night, and he'd usually be gone by at least Sunday, and in those times, all we as kids knew was that there was lots of arguing and fighting and screaming and raging, because my mother would take the opportunity at in every moment to criticize and condemn and so on, and you know, and my father was not one to be told what to do either. So I would say they were equally to blame. But when, you know, sometimes he would storm off on a Saturday and leave and not come back for another few weeks, and then sometimes you know, he'd stay till Sunday. But we all sort of had, you know, we all, because at this point I was living with my mother and my three sisters. My two brothers had since left home. But we'd all breathe a sigh of relief when he left, because it meant at least there was a certain kind of peace in our household. I'm sure that many of you will resonate with this story as I'm telling you. So, Chris, what do you think? Do we think everybody's logged on yet?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great time to start.
Okay, so you all know this is story time. So here we go with the story. And the story is that this morning is about myself and my daddy. And I've just sort of blackened his character well and truly, without meaning to, because boy, if I had to live with my mother, I doubt very much if I'd have ever gone home at weekends. so, so she was a piece of work. But anyway, all right. So here we go. So um, to set the scene of this story, as I just told you, I was about 11 years old when my father was forced to leave the army because it was, you know, automatic retirement at 55. He then came home and he joined what in England is known as the Commissionaire Corps. And the Commissionaire Corps was set up for soldiers like my father, military men, not just soldiers, military men like my father, who had retired but really were not fit to do anything other than be military men. And so he joined the Commissionaire Corps, and it was sort of like a security guard situation. And you know, the Commissionaire Corps got them jobs doing different things, and security at the football matches, security at the wrestling matches, which I used to love because my daddy used to take me with him and sit me on the front row, and you know, and I loved the wrestling. And so he used to do all those sorts of jobs, and he eventually became chief commissioner for the area that we lived in. So then he could give himself the best jobs. That was my father, a very clever man, and he could allocate other jobs to his friends and so on. I know it's not a fair thing to do, but I'm sure it went on. But anyway, here we go. So now, so at 11 years old, and of course my two older sisters might have had a little bit more difficulty with accepting. So one minute he's not there, and the next minute he's there every single day. And he was a severe taskmaster. I mean, he brought all of the rules and the regulations of the army with him when he came home to live with us full time. He was very tough. He was very much a disciplinarian. You know, it was, and between him and my mother, I have to tell you, was not an easy childhood by any stretch of the imagination. However, I told a story on Thursday night, and if you want to hear that story, please go to YouTube, or you can actually, I think Chris is going to put it up on Facebook at some point. But I told a story about my father, and I can only ever remember him sitting on my knee twice. I can't ever remember my mother sitting on my mother's knee or being held by my mother in any shape or form, but 2 times I can remember my father sat me on his knee, and those 2 times that he sat me on his knee were times when he wanted to give me comfort and wanted to be there for me. And we didn't grow up in a house where emotions were talked about. When we came home from school, there was never anybody to say, how did you get on at school today, or what did you do at school today? There was nobody to ask you who you were, how you felt, what you were doing, nothing. It was, let's say, an indifferent household. So now here we are. We're fast forwarding, and I was 15 or 16 years old. So once upon a time, okay, so once upon a time, I was 16, I must have been 16 years old, 16, yeah, a little bit older. So anyway, thereabouts. And I had a boyfriend. I just started going out with this young man. His name is John, who I'd had a crush on for years. Anyway, that's a whole other story. I'm not going to go into that this morning. This is about heroes and how they can sometimes be, well, often they're heroes in times of war and in times of need, but are they heroes at home? And sometimes it's you don't always see the heroes when they're home. Anyway, so I'm 16 and a half years old, and my boyfriend John had gone off with a group of uh, uh, he was older, a little bit older than I was, and he'd gone off with a group of other kids, and this trip had been planned for ages. I certainly wouldn't have been allowed to go on the trip anyway, but so they went away for a week, sort of like as a church group, and off they went for a week. And now, in those days, I was, as you can imagine, very insecure, really totally shy, absolutely shy, would barely speak to anybody. Unless I was spoken, I would barely have anything to say to anybody. But what I used to do when things got really bad in the house, when things got really bad with my mother or with my sisters, or if I just wanted to hide away, which was often, I would go into, we had a living room and a sitting room. And the sitting room was known as the best room. It was only ever used when we had visitors. And so there was never a fire in that place unless we had visitors. It was a very cold, very isolated room, and nobody really went in there because it was the best room and it was kept as the best room. So the only reason I would go in there, which was on a regular basis, I was allowed to go in there, was because the piano was in there. And I would often sit at the piano. This true story, I'm not lying to you. I was so obviously so desperate to get away from everybody else in the family. I would often go in and with a coat on, with a scarf and a hat, and of course couldn't wear gloves. But I would go in there all wrapped up and trying to, warm, and you could literally see your breath. It was that cold in that room during the winter months. But I would go and sit in there and play the piano. And I played the piano practically every day, and I would sit there for a long time, and until my mother called me to say it was time for bed, or until they'd had enough of listening to me playing. They said, "That's enough, come out." And so I would go into, that was my sanctuary. The piano was my sanctuary, and I loved to play. And I love to play and put my heart and soul into the playing of whatever piece that I was playing. So now my boyfriend is gone away, for the week. And now I'm sitting at the piano for a whole different reason. I was only 16 and a half years old or something, very sort of, dramatic, lovelorn, etc., etc. And I would go in there day and night, and especially at the weekends, I would go in and play the piano. And probably I don't really recall, but I probably would play sort of romantic songs or sad ballads or something like that anyway. And I would sort of creep in there as often as I could, especially this week that my boyfriend was away. So now one day I was sitting, it was afternoon, I was sitting playing the piano and pining for my boyfriend, thinking he'll be home very soon. It's only another couple of days or some such, and I'm pining away for him, but not thinking that anybody else even would guess that I was pining, because who took any notice of me anyway? And I'm playing this piece, and my father opened the door to the to the sitting room, and we had sliding doors in our house. My mother decided at one point that she liked the idea of sliding doors, so the door slid open, and my father stood in the doorway. And you never knew what mood he was going to be in. You never knew how you were going to approach him, and whenever he crooked his finger or he called you to say, come here, your stomach, or I should say my stomach would drop. It would literally drop, because I would never know if I was going to be told off for something, if I was going to be punished, which would result in a, good old beating, or you never knew what was going to happen. So there he stood in the doorway, and my hands froze over the keyboards, and my stomach dropped when I saw him, because he had this really serious look on his face, and he sort of beckoned me to come out into the hallway. I slid off of the chair. We didn't have a piano stool. I slid off of the chair and sort of tentatively, slowly walked out into the hallway. And my father stood there, stern as stern could be. And he said, hold out your hand. And there was no disobeying, no second guessing. I did as I was told, and I held out my hand. And he put this huge stone in the palm of my hand. And then he said, look at me. I want you to listen to what I have to say to you. And I'm looking at the stone, and I look at my father, completely bemused. And he said to me, I want you to make your heart as hard as that stone. Are you listening to me? Are you paying attention? I want you to make your heart as hard as that stone. I looked down at the stone, and I nodded to my dad, because what else could I do? And then he left. But as I'm standing there in front of him and I'm listening to his words, I knew there was this innate sense of knowing why he told me this. But I also knew that he was wrong. The reason he told me this was because he loved me. He was being a hero in that moment to try to help me. In a family where nobody spoke, nobody said anything to anybody, nobody even showed any interest, my father was showing interest. He was trying to, in his way, in his misguided way, as I feel it turned out, in his misguided way, he was trying to protect me. He was trying to keep me from all the heartache and the heartbreak that those of us with soft hearts will feel. And I also realized as I got older that as a soldier, He'd been in World War II, but remember, he'd been a soldier for many years before that. He'd been all over the world. He'd been to China. He'd been to India. He'd been to just about every place you can imagine. He'd been to Greece. He'd been flown into Germany on missions. He'd seen so many wicked and cruel and dreadfully painful things. He'd seen all of these things, and he knew what life was really about. He knew that life was pain and hurt and trauma and difficulties. Now, not only that, he was married to my mother, and nobody would want to be married to my mother. He knew that people could be cruel. You didn't have to go to war to see devastation around you. And you all know that. I know you know that. You don't have to be in the midst of a war zone to be shot down, to be hurt, to be, in fact, severely wounded. You don't have to be in the middle of a war zone to feel as if you're dying, sometimes as if you're dying on the spot. And my father knew these things. He knew all of these things. He knew that life was cruel, and that if I didn't toughen up, that I was going to be hurt. And his way of saying that to me, his way of protecting me, of trying to prepare me for what he knew was coming, because it's true, I was a very soft-hearted girl. I'm still a very soft-hearted girl. But he knew that life was going to, in some ways, ravage me. He knew that in some ways life was going to, hurt me. And he knew that already, even as a little girl, life had hurt me and had ravaged me. So in his heroic way, a man who rarely spoke about his emotions and rarely said, well, never said, I love you, nor did my mother, never can remember that. But, not used to sharing emotions, this was the best he could come up with. And basically he was saying, harden your heart, harden your heart. Don't let anyone hurt you. Don't let anyone get to you. Don't let anybody cause you pain. He said that very simply by showing me this stone, giving this stone to me and saying, make your heart like that stone. Now, as I said, I knew innately, I just knew that that's certainly what he'd had to do himself, which is why I never remember sitting on his knee except twice. He never reached out to us. He didn't dare, because underneath all of that, my father was so soft-hearted also. But he wasn't going to show it to anybody, and he suffered for that. And I knew that it didn't matter how much I tried, or even if I wanted to make my heart as hard as that stone, I knew that it would be impossible for me. There are so many people who will say of people like myself, the problem with you or the trouble with you. Some of you listening will really recognize this. The trouble with you is you're too sensitive. The trouble with you is you're oversensitive. The trouble with you, because it excuses their insensitivity, or they think it excuses their sensitivity. But the truth is that those of us who are soft-hearted, those of us who allow our sensitivity to show, we're the ones who shine out. We're the ones who can reach out to others. We're the ones who can, without one qualm or one question, say, I love you. We're the ones who grow in a spiritual way. We are the ones who suffer. We are. It's true. The more soft-hearted you are, the more hurt you feel, the more sensitive you are, the more pain you feel. But the more you grow and the more you learn. So, what price? I'll pay the price anytime, as long as My heart is never ever like that stone. So sorry, Daddy. I know he's standing here listening to me, and I know he's got tears in his eyes, and I know he agrees with me now because he knows better. So sorry, Daddy. But um, my heart will remain as soft and pliable and as wonderful and ready for hurt and ready for joy for all of my life, because this is who I am. But I do see and can clearly see that in that one moment when I stood in the hallway with my daddy, the fact that he had gone out into the garden, he'd seen me, he'd watched me, he knew. And he might have been worrying about it not just because of the boyfriend, he might have been worrying about it for all of my life. Seeing this sensitive little girl who hurts and who cries and who gets emotional about things. He went out into the garden. He couldn't tell me as much as he could show me. And Daddy, I know you're listening, he did show me in that heroic moment when he went and picked up that stone and brought it into me. He was a hero in that moment because in his way, he was doing everything he could, everything he knew to try to protect me and to keep me safe from hurt. The end. How are we doing, Chris?
We're doing good, Rosemary. The high priestess says in the chat room, I was having anxiety this morning. So glad it's story time. Now I can do my yoga and listen to something relaxing.
Oh, good.
That was typed before you started your story, so
Uh-oh,
not sure
uh-oh.
how
Oh
relaxing
gosh, oh
that
dear.
story was.
Well, let us know, my lovely. Okay, Chris, keep going.
Judith says, I went back and watched the replay of the Warrior program yesterday. It was wonderful and moving.
Yes, it really was. It really was. Thank you for sharing that. It is worth, if you didn't see it, it really is worth you heading towards YouTube or wherever it is and finding it. Keep going, Chris.
Jane says hello to everyone from Manchester, England.
Hi, Jane from Manchester, England. Is it cold? Is it rainy? Is it snowy?
Dean is on. He was wondering if your father was a retrospective soul.
Oh, no, no, no. My mother was a retrospective soul. My father is like me. He's a warrior. He's an earth sign and a warrior soul. No, 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 not at all a retrospective. In fact, it's unfortunate because those of you who know soul signs and know about soul signs will absolutely know. We have those other soul signs, different soul signs to us, who are very compatible with us. And then we have those soul signs who are the least compatible to us. And my poor parents happen to be a warrior soul, which is an earth sign, and my mother, a retrospective soul, which is a fire sign. They are of all of the soul signs, and I too am a warrior soul like my father. So of all of the soul signs, of all of the mixes and the joinings and the connections and the energies and so on, I would say that the warrior soul and the retrospective soul are the very least compatible. So it's no wonder we had all of that awful, awful, horrible childhood that we had, because they only had to look at each other, and because my mother, being the fire sign, would more often than not set everything off, because she just wanted the attention and the emotion and the anyway, all of that stuff. So no, so my father absolutely. Oh gosh, Daddy, just imagine somebody's thinking you're a retrospective self. That's the worst insult. He's laughing though. You're all right. Keep going, Chris.
Except to the poor retrospectives in that case, because they need to be fabulous, right? They're a great soul in and of themselves. They're
They
looking for
are, and
perfection.
and let me just say this about all of us here. It depends on your maturity, because you can have a warrior soul, for instance. An immature warrior soul can really absolutely, or I should say, an immature earth sign can come across as being really bossy rather than assertive. There's a huge difference between being assertive, knowing what you want, but allowing other people to have their voice and to, to be able to compromise. But if you're an immature earth sign, you're going to be a bossy little boots who wants their own way all the time. So the same with the retrospective soul. I don't know if Jeff is listening this morning, but I know that Jeff is a retrospective soul and married to the most amazing earth sign. She's not a warrior, but she's a central soul. But anyway, he is a much more, he didn't used to be, but as he's gotten older, as he's grown, as he's learned more, he's become a very mature retrospective soul. And you cannot get a better soul sign than a mature retrospective soul, because they know who they are and they have to work really, really hard to not go into that glass half empty sort of mode, which is what retrospective souls are want to do. So depending on the maturity of the soul depends on how that plays out. But anyway, we're getting into soul signs now, aren't we? So keep going, Chris.
Mark says, I was dubbed as sensitive when I was a young boy, and I wonder, did you keep the stone?
No, as I was telling the story, I was thinking about that. I was wondering what happened to that stone. I might have kept it for a while. I don't recall. I don't recall. I don't even recall what happened after that. I recall going back into sitting at the piano and thinking about it. And my father sort of, we just closed the door and I went back into playing the piano. But I've thought about it so often over the years and thought about it when it happened. There are times in your life, you don't have to be old to recognize when something is profound, when you're hearing something that's profound. I was 16 and a half years old at that time, and that was a very profound moment in my life. First of all, because my father had taken the time to come and to help me. He must have felt really strongly about it to actually do something about it, to actually come to me with that piece of advice. So that in itself was very profound, that he gave me that moment. But also what he said was very profound because, and especially as I grew older, of course you realize how awful it must have been for my father to live his life having to toughen up, having to not allow things to get to him or to hurt him or to upset him, because he also was a very sensitive person, a very sensitive soul, and capable of great love and great loyalty. And he was a very passionate man. If you didn't like something, you knew it, and if he did like something, you knew it. And he was always, as I got older, when I got to my sort of mid to late teens and then early 20s, as I got older, he was the one person that I could go to. He was the one person that I could talk to. He was the one person, if I had trouble, he could go to. And I was the one person for him. I was the only person he told where he hid his stash, for instance. I was the only person he confided how painful it was living with my mother. He was I was the only person he could come to and talk to. Unfortunately, I was young at the time, and often when he told me things, I didn't quite know how well to react. Of course, now I've got all the wisdom in the world. Well, enough anyway, that I could have talked to him and could have maybe given him some advice or at least empathized. But we had this an odd relationship out of all of the stuff that went on in our lives as we were growing up and as we got older, and watching my parents hating each other and living in the same house, really my mother despising. My mother was the one with the hatred, and having to deal with all of that, and how awful that must have been. for my father to sort of, what a burden to bear, what a heavy, heavy load to bear, and to have to imagine that people had to live that way. And he didn't actually have to live that way. Or sometimes wonder, why did he stay? But anyway, we're waxing lyrical now. Chris, keep going.
Well, Carolyn had written this before you just gave that answer, but she's asking, did you ever feel any help from that difficult rock instruction? What a gift of appreciation you give your father for his good intentions.
Well, I do feel when I was, when I was growing up, and this was after the rock thing. It was a little while after that. I might have been 18 years old or something, and I came in late. I was actually working, but my father had this rule, and he only had this rule for me, and it was not a rule that applied to any of my sisters at all. For some reason, the rule was only applying to me. I had to be home by 10 o'clock. If I got home 2 or 3 minutes beforehand, my father was always sitting in his chair, and I'd walk in the door, and he'd give me that look, and he'd say, when I say 10 o'clock, I mean 10 o'clock. I don't mean a minute before, and I don't mean a minute after. I'm laughing about it now, but it was awful at the time. And if I was a minute after 10, or 2 minutes, or 3 minutes after 10, when I say 10 o'clock, I don't mean a minute before, and I don't mean a minute after, and so on. Anyway, and one day I'll tell you a story of that episode, because it was always the same. And if I arrived at 10 o'clock, it would never say good for you, because I would always arrive either seconds before or seconds after. Anyway, but I remember coming home late. I'd been working really, really late, and I was exhausted. I was tired. I'd been in a cold factory with my boss and a couple of other colleagues doing inventories and such like, and I was cold and I was hungry, and I came into my father when I was right and all that, and then I said, I've been working, I've been working, and my mother must have taken one look at me, and for some weird and unaccountable reason, and the only time I remember this ever happening, took pity on me. And she said, have you eaten? Or my father said, have you eaten? And I said, no. And my mother actually, now normally they both would have said, well, you know where the food is. But my mother, for some reason or another, got up and went into the kitchen and put on the frying pan to cook some eggs for me or something. And I'm standing there, and I'm cold and I'm tired, and I've been in this cold factory all day long, working really hard. And and then my father comes home and gives me all of that again. But I felt I stood in the kitchen with my mother while she was making these eggs for me, and I can remember feeling so lost and so dejected. Not just rejected, but just dejected. And I couldn't figure out. My mother must have really felt sorry for me to actually have got up at that time of night to cook me some eggs, and I'm standing there, and she obviously took one look at me, and she said, "I'm going to tell you something now. Uh, he's only ever like this with you." Well, I knew that. And then she said, and I remember her saying it almost through her teeth. She could barely tell me. She didn't want to tell me, but she obviously, the guilt was riding high in that moment with her. And she said, well, he's like it with you because he loves you the best. He loves you the most. And I was so shocked by that revelation. I just stared at her. And she said, all in a huff, I know you don't believe me, but it's true. He loves you the best. And then she left me to deal with the eggs myself, stalked off from the kitchen. But looking back, I could see he was so protective of me, which is why he was the toughest on me. I was the prettiest. I was the cleverest. I was always in the A stream at school when none of my siblings were. I think he was worried, and also, of course, he knew that I was the most sensitive. So all of those things rolled into one. I was a walking time bomb as far as he was concerned, and he just was trying to keep me safe in that awful, overpowering, possessive, controlling way. He's laughing at me, sort of looking at me now. We've had these conversations before, he and I. But in that way, uh, as you know, as you get older, you see these things, you see them more clearly. And I do believe that my mother was right. As begrudging as she told me, I do believe that I was his favourite. Chris, we're getting
Or
more stories in this story time, aren't we?
it but it's really nice to have this introspective side of it and to hear more about your dad because when I all these shows that I do with you and you say, "Oh, my daddy's here." In my head I'm going, "Hello." And then I'm also trying to go, "Oh geez, what do I call him?" So if your dad's there, ask him what I can call him, but just knowing how important he is to you in your life is wonderful to hear.
Well,
Um,
I think a lot of people can relate. There are people in your life, parents, when you're growing up, they can be your worst nightmare. And my father was my worst nightmare, I can tell you, in some ways. Um, but my, he was the best thing in my life he, because, okay, maybe it was easier for me to see the difference. When my mother hit, hit out, she could do a backhander that sent you from one end of the hallway to the other. And it was often the case. But when my mother lashed out, whether it was with her tongue or her hands or whatever, um, it was it was always in anger or frustration or bitterness or meanness. That was always her way because that's who she was. And she was a retrospective soul. She was a very immature retrospective soul. And she only knew anger. So she would lash out in that anger, in that frustration. And 9 times out of 10, unfortunately, I was the scapegoat. And that's, there's always one in a family, isn't there? Anyway. But when my father punished us, uh, and mostly me, as we were growing up, he did it because of the discipline. He did it because it was a necessary. He saw it as a necessary discipline. He deliberately he would go upstairs, lean over the bed, take your pants off, lean over the bed, and wait for me to come up, and then he'd beat the heck out of your bottom and your back and your legs and so on. But he would never do it straight away. You might have to wait a few minutes, and sometimes he'd make you wait an hour. It was deliberate because the punishment was lying face down on the bed with your bare bum in the air, waiting for him to come up. But he never lashed out in anger. I can only remember once my father lashing out in anger when instead of putting a packet of tea in the tea caddy, which was right there next to the teapot with the lid off, I inadvertently put the tea in the teapot instead of the tea caddy, and I did get a bat across the head for that. But when it was a sort of real punishment time, he did it for different reasons than my mother, which are to me not necessarily great, but far more acceptable and far more understandable. And I think that all of us, as we get older and we look at the way our parents were, we look at the way our families were, we can see much clearer, can't we, how things were. And I mean, you know, two people growing up in this miserable, miserable environment, of course the kids are going to get smacked about a bit. I mean, that's got to be so hard, hasn't it? So I think that you know, we should try if we can to see the heroic things about them rather than you know, rather than sort of point the finger and always have something awful to say about someone. There's always something nice you can say about someone, I think. I'm thinking. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, Chris, keep going now. Stop me talking before I go too far.
Tracy's saying sensitive people have the most beautiful souls.
They do, don't they? I totally am with you on that, my lovely. You wouldn't be a sensitive soul, would you? I think you might be.
Judith says, I don't know what my sign is. I know I am very sensitive and wish for only peace. Let us all just get along type.
Well, you know, you're going to have to read soul signs. And I might help you along a little bit, but I'm not going to tell you. I make a point of not telling people what soul sign they are because you've got to come to it yourself. But when you do read soul signs, I always I stress it in the book, but a lot of people don't take any notice. You cannot choose your soul sign. You cannot choose your soul sign. It's not about what you want to be, it's about who you are. So you cannot choose your sign until you've chosen your group. There are, for most of us, 4 groups to choose from. There's a 5th group which we won't go into. But you've got to find your group first. You've got to figure out, are you an earth sign, a water sign, an air sign, or a fire sign? Fire signs are people driven by their emotions. Air signs are those wonderful creatures who just float along. Of course, they have their dips and, passive aggressive moments, but they sort of float along and don't let too much get to them. We have our water signs who are the compromisers in life. There's more to it than I'm telling you, but they are the compromisers. And then we have the earth signs who are the doers, and not that other signs can't be doers, and they are, but uh, earth signs are, usually the leaders, the ones who sort of, the chiefs who head off into whatever fray, and they're the ones who sort of like to be the action takers. But there's much more to it than that, and you have to find your soul group before you find your soul sign. When you find your soul group, you've only got 3 soul signs to choose from. That's all you've got. One you would dismiss immediately and say, that's not me. And the other 2, you might go back and forth a little bit. Well, I could be this or I could be that. But by a process of elimination, you'll see which you are more of, and you'll come to your decision. Chris, let's get back to heroes.
Well, Mark is saying, I wonder if the stone given you was once how he had to handle his own heart to be tough and not take things as sensitive.
Well, yes, but you can't, can you, if you're not the kind of person? And I think it's not a question of not taking things as sensitively. I think it's that we have to learn not to take things personally. We can still be sensitive enough to be hurt, but we can also be sensitive enough to be able to see beyond, or for the reasons why people might want to say things or do things that hurt us. We are sensitive enough to be able to see the bigger picture. So I think that being sensitive is a wonderful thing. I don't believe there's anything like oversensitivity. I don't think, you can't be oversensitive. You can't be too sensitive. You can be ultra sensitive. You can be beautifully sensitive. And when we embrace our sensitivity, we realize and we learn that, even though people say things that really can stab us in the heart, if we take a step back, because we are sensitive, we can see beyond their words, and we can see and understand that, if they had known for 1 second that they might have hurt us, they would never have done it. So we're sensitive enough to be able to sense other people's sensitivity, and also to know when people are lashing out because they're hurt. So never, ever, ever sort of deny your sensitivity. Embrace it, because that's what will help you, and it will help you to grow. Chris. Are you there? Did I lose you?
Judith says, you and your father were so much alike with your spiritual sensitivities. He felt that.
Well, yes. I mean, my father was always told that he was very mediumistic. And he knew things. And I think that probably one of the reasons that I was his, let's say, his favorite, is because he sensed in me what he knew within himself, and he saw how very much the same we were in so many different ways. I'm so much like my father in so many ways. Oh, thank you so much. He tells me I'm more mature, which I am, of course. I'm a more mature earth sign than he is, let's put it that way. uh, but probably because of him and because of the way he was, I always tell people, and I'm serious about it, my parents taught me how not to be. And my father has taught me about determination, and he's taught me about the rod of iron, which is my backbone, which has, despite all odds, stayed firm and strong. He taught me that it's okay to be that. He's taught me that it's okay to be a warrior, but he also has taught me that we have a responsibility to our children, to nurture them and to care for them and to love them, Chris, and to show it, should I say. Okay, Chris.
Well, we're coming right up on time, Rosemary. I wanted to leave you a couple of minutes to talk about the event you have coming up in December, December 11th.
December the 11th, it is our Christmas webinar. We are Greg and I are going to be spending 3 hours. We've done this before, we've done this twice before. So I'm going to suggest you hot foot it to our website as soon as tickets are available. So we are going to be having a webinar, and I'm going to be giving messages. Greg and I are going to be giving messages, and that's all we're going to be doing. So we can't promise that everyone who comes to the webinar will get a message, but one way or another, every single person who comes to the webinar will get a message, because if it's not a direct message to you, it will be a direct message to you through somebody else or somebody else's message. These events are amazing. They really are. You can really see how the spirit world so knows us, so knows so many details of our lives. Chris, what would you say when you're listening to us talking to the spirit world, and how they come through and how they give these incredible and insightful messages, personal messages to the people who are lucky enough to receive them? What would you say?
I even as you're talking about it, I sit here and I think about the privilege, almost a holiness, a sacredness that seems to energetically transpire in these events, where if just two of us human beings sitting talking to each other gave the same message would be lacking. There seems to be just a love that envelops any message. And
It
I
is,
always feel
Chris.
privileged to as you say, I'm helping you here in the chat room, right? So I'm not going to get the message. The people who are showing up are going to get the message. But the fact is, through every message I hear that everybody else gets, I am transformed.
Yeah. Well, I think when we begin and we have collective, we have a collective group of people from the spirit world who have come to join us. It's almost like a sacredness, a feeling of sacredness, or spirituality. It's almost as if you can uh, see the light that they bring, and it's almost a tangible thing that people are feeling when they're part of this webinar. It is an amazing thing, and of course we're doing it in December, so it's Christmas coming up for those of you who are like me, Christians, and for those of you who are not Christians. Uh, you know, you we're all spiritual beings, aren't we? We're, as Teilhard de Chardin said, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. But I like to add on to that quote, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and I add on, hopefully, in a spiritual way, so because that's important too. But it is a very moving, the spiritual event, and you hear people responding when they're, perhaps somebody has a parent who comes through, or somebody has a child who comes through from the spirit world, and you can hear people, you can hear the heartbreak in their voices, but not just the heartbreak of losing someone, the joy, the absolute joy that they feel that, you know, they're hearing from them again, they're getting a message from them again. I mean, it really is very moving. So that is on the 11th of December. And I do think also we might do something else in December, maybe sort of, we'll have to think about it, but I'm thinking of a competition of some kind, Chris, that will encourage people to join in with, and we'll have the prizes, or maybe we'll do some CDs, or maybe we'll do some books or something like that. We'll think of some prizes for everybody. But it's been a while since we had a competition. In order to join a competition, I have to give you a heads up. You have to subscribe. So it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, everybody. We are, for those who are subscribing, we're planning sending out via email gifts for everybody at the end of the month or the beginning of December, because you know it's Christmas after all. So we're going to give all of you subscribers a little bit of something extra. So if you are not a subscriber, it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. I promise you, we will not inundate you with emails. We'll send you an email maybe 2 or 3 times a month. That's what we do. So you'll not be inundated with emails. We won't be sort of, you know, bombarding you with those. If you want to subscribe, go to my website, rosemaryaltea.com, and click on the subscribe button. That will automatically put you on our mailing list. We send a newsletter out. Now, if you want to do it and you want December's newsletter, you better hurry up, because the December's newsletter is coming in the next 10 days or 2 weeks or something, at the beginning of December, the 1st of December, hopefully. So if you want the newsletter, I usually write something in the newsletter, and Chris is brilliant at the newsletter. So if you want to be, want to receive the newsletter once a month, that's all, then you'll see quite clearly the subscribe button on the website. Also on the website, you will be able to click for tickets for the webinar. And, just remember, we don't have a lot of people at our webinars. We limit our numbers because, we like to have smaller groups. I prefer to have smaller groups, more intimate groups, so that, more people get a chance to receive a message or whatever else it is that we're doing. So that, again, I'll say it's December the 11th. We are still celebrating our heroes for the rest of this month, so we'll have 1 or 2 more stories maybe next week. We know that Thanksgiving is coming up also very soon, so we will not be having a Thursday morning when it's Thanksgiving. We will not be doing anything for Thanksgiving because Chris is with her family celebrating. I personally do not celebrate Thanksgiving. I'm rarely invited anywhere for Thanksgiving, making all my friends feel guilty when I say that to them. But I am not invited mostly to Thanksgiving. Nobody loves me. No, we're not going to end on that note. I'm only kidding, right? So, okay, subscribe, and share. If you've enjoyed this show, if you've enjoyed the stories, if you go to YouTube and you missed last Thursday's story, you've got to go and listen to Jim's story, because it's an amazing story. He moved all of us and inspired all of us. You'll find that on YouTube as well, on my YouTube channel as well. So anyway, in the meantime, Chris, you are an angel. You've given up an hour with your family, who you rarely see, for us. So we're going to get off now. So I'd like to say a special thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Of course, my thanks to Gregel and to my daddy and my brothers here as well. So my thanks to them for joining in. And especially, I'd like to thank all of you. You are wonderful. I really appreciate that. I appreciate your following me. I appreciate your sort of hanging around with me. I appreciate you wanting to share with me. So please, all of you, until I see you again, we will have our Thursday morning this coming Thursday. the spirit world sees all, and we'll be doing some off the cuff stuff on and off throughout the next few days. So until I see you again, thank you so much for joining me. Please have a very blessed rest of the day and have a very blessed weekend, everybody. Bye bye.